All right, guys, let's talk a little bit about some finesse baits for spring coming up, really spring and summer. And we're going to start with the hard baits for finesse, and I'll do a part two, which will be some of the more soft plastic finesse that have come in. Gotten a bunch of JDM, a whole bunch of HP Bugs, OSP. We've got a whole bunch of stuff from Raid, Valley Hill, a lot of JM stuff I'm going to break down. In the soft plastic video because it's probably 20 or 30 different different stuff from Jackal, Raid, Valley Hill, and any number of other JDM baits. We're going to start with hard baits more or less today, but of the finesse small variety. And to give you an idea of what we're talking about with these baits is here's a jaw dropper from First Gen Fishing, okay? Just regular, standardized jig head. Okay, this is the jaw dropper in the crawl color. Okay, so that's the size of that jig head. And so when we're talking about finesse, and then inside of finesse, there's micro finesse, you're looking at this. Look at the standard. Okay, standard jig, standard 2/0, 3/0, depending on what you got in your jig heads, right? Standard, okay? And then you get down to micro. Tiny, itty bitty things. And when we're talking about smallmouth, these things get torn up. It's why you got to buy them in packs of like 20, okay? Because they will get torn up. But they also have this tremendous ability of just lodging into that lip for a smallmouth, and aggressives can't throw it. Aggressive smallmouth can't throw it. It's just a small. You can see how small that is. And so a lot of guys will message me, and a couple guys the other day were like, so what you got? What has come in? And so you've got now like Raid, fish roller from Raid, and things like that are now coming in the 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 2 inch. Which if it's 2 inch Japan, it's really like an 1.5 inch here. And to give you this example, that's it right there. That's a Raid fish roller, and the smallest size they got. Okay, relative to that. And I only say that because I know I'm going to talk about hard baits here, but to give you a little perspective on what we're talking about in terms of size, right? And really, for me, anything in that 2.5 inch or smaller, maybe 2 inch or smaller, for me is more finesse micro. Like in my head, that's how I like approach it. Doesn't matter whether you're just running a really, really small, for example, tiny, teeny tiny. Again, think this, and then think this. Okay? Look how tiny that is. Okay? That's not even in it. That's just about 1.25. Okay? So just keep that in mind. So when we get into hard baits, we're talking about a little bit different. You've got a wide variety of stuff that's on the market now for everything that's bladed. Spinner blade, for example. These are extremely popular. Look how tiny that is. Okay? These have great action. A lot of these, I will tell you, that I wouldn't be too concerned over what, if you ever come across them at an expo or, at a shop or tackle shop. You don't see them that much in a lot of like big box stores, but you do find them a little bit more at some independent shops. The weight on this is crazy, okay? It's like all metal, okay? I wouldn't be so concerned over the coloration patterns. They can be kind of wild sometimes because a lot of these are obviously come from Japan. So a lot of them will be fire tiger and bright greens, reds, fire kind of colors. They're not really that many available yet because they're metal. It's not like your normal, more like a blade bait that they're like really metal. You don't find a lot of variety. Like look at the natural fish species because a lot of the stuff over in Japan is not a natural forage species for us in the States. So, but it really doesn't matter what coloration pattern that you get. I mean, I like anything that's red or green. I'm going to roll with because we know that that's the best. See, But mainly it's the kicker, man. It's the blade. It's that action. You can get a lot of distance when you're throwing, because of how heavy this is. So you can be a lot further away. And then you got that blade on the back, especially in that clear water reflection from the sun. It just entice strikes. And it's got that single treble, which is a lot harder to get rid of. But again, easy, right? Think of that. Look at my size of my hand, and look at that bait. So think about that jaw. On a 15 to a 18-inch smallmouth, right? Easy. As far as I showed you the underspin here, and then you can also go up a little bit bigger. That's a bigger one. I still consider this to be finesse. It is actually very, very small on this. And then you can obviously, you could change out to whatever color you want to. Like right now, early spring, probably a couple weeks away, but we're still going to see a lot more crawl in the river systems. I'm going to switch to the to variety. See that boot tail on that will work perfectly, or you can switch it up to a split tail. Okay, either ones, these get poured. Either way, you can find any kind of your preferred soft plastics, custom or mainstream, big brands. They're all out there now. Everything is kind of like being downsized. This is kind of like why I'm starting off with that before we get these hard baits, is because like the forward-facing sonar craze is still with us. There's guys fishing today, right now, I imagine, just utilizing that forward-facing live scope on Lake Fork down in Texas for the Bassmaster Kayak Open Series Championship. Looks like 103 inches, best 5. A 22.5, a 22, a 21.5, a 19, and 18 is leading that event right now with 103 inches. Texas, right? But forward-facing sonar has kind of downsized. We've kind of moved away from big glide baits and big swim baits of a couple years, right? To now the minnow. Now we're getting, everything is getting smaller. You could think Great Lakes Finesse, right? Probably one of the most up-and-coming brands, although I think they just sold this last year. One of the up-and-coming smallmouth brands. Rivaling probably Nico and some of the other ones that I'm more familiar with in terms of smaller presentations for crawl and for shad type, goby style kind of baits, right? Because forward-facing sonar has kind of pushed us to go smaller with a hover stroller or jig head or whatever. And so that dynamic is then also transferred over into the finesse, okay? The finesse baits, the smaller 2-inch style hard baits, okay? That have always been popular in Japan. Always. This is not new. We are always late to the game in where we catch up in the fishing industry, it seems. We were that way with the chatterbait, okay? A lot of people associate the chatterbait with Z-Man, right? Well, in reality, that bait, the bladed jig, the vibrating jig, was being fished in Japan for years before we ever saw it here. And under different names and different, titles and what it's called, okay? And same goes for these. You guys might be familiar with, obviously, Megabass is a pretty well-known name here in the States. They've got they've got trout lines in Japan that are mainly for trout over there. And they've got the new Great Hunting line, which is a lot smaller, more BFS style baits for those people who love to throw the bait caster and love to throw smaller formatted baits, right? They're crushing it right now in that size market, okay, internationally, because they've got that supply chain where they can get those baits throughout the entire world, and that's where everybody is moving to, right? And so, and I run into the same discussions with folks because it's like, a lot of people are like, oh, well, those big swim baits, I can't catch any smallmouth, or I can't catch any largemouth with those baits. Those baits are too big for my river, or those baits are too big for my lake or my pond or my fishery. And, you get that pushback. You get the same pushback when people tell you that they, those small baits won't catch fish. And it's like, so only medium-sized baits. So so fish don't eat any forage unless they're medium. 3 inches, 3.5 inches, because that's really in essence what they're saying. Because the 6 inches, the 7 inches, and the 8-inch swim baits can't catch fish, and then evidently the 1 and 2 inch baits can't catch fish either. And it doesn't really make any sense, right? It really all depends really on, the enticement and the conditions and how hungry the fish are, how willing they are to chase. And so the whole idea is, for me, what I've noticed here for me in terms of going finesse is I think smallmouth especially are far more curious than we give them credit for. And when you start throwing things that mirror forage colors, okay, in your fishery and in a different format, smallmouths get real curious real quick. And that's the whole point. If you can entice them to follow and to chase, 8 out of 10 times you're going to get a strike. Okay? It's that first thing where they're like, right? And these are just real easy meals, right? Easy meals, okay, for smallmouth. Here's a perfect one right here. This is more like the wintertime one, really, but that gold front, black back, kind of reminds. It's got the perchy kind of color to it. If you look in that, how that's done, see how transparent that really is. And so when these get painted up, you definitely can see through this one, okay, because it's done with transparent paint. Transparent paints. It doesn't have that base. Doesn't have that base coat white paint. If you ever watch any bait making videos, they usually start out by painting the blanks white or tan or cream or pearl white, whatever that is as a base color first, because the blanks are just clear, right? Well, on later, like in the last couple of years, one of the crazes has been, especially with jerkbaits, is leaving it clear and then doing your paint, so you get that transparent, kind of like fluorescent. Then guys are putting, color shifts and things like that into them, which is really neat. Something I'm just now getting into. I showed these on the video because I actually had 2 people reach out to me about getting some of these for them, and this is the same situation where it's basically just getting those baits in that size 2 1/4 inch. I mean, just forget about the bill, but just that distance on these. These were more like for my trout video on the trout stocking of ways in which, and there's a knocker in that one, which is really cool. These small baits now are also coming with the same kind of knockers that our big crankbaits, our 1/2, 1.5, 2.5 crankbaits would have, right? So now they're just, everything is just getting downplayed a little smaller. You get a little rattle sight, little more. It's more like a silent, but it's in there. Okay, little smaller rattles bouncing around in there. So, and then you've got your solid, which have always been, if you can remember back growing up, like the Rapala have always been kind of like just kind of crazy colors, right? And so you still have that trend with the smaller hard baits, right? That a lot of them you'll see are just crazy colors, like the all bright chartreuse, bright orange, bright reds, and that's really just because they're this size. They're the logic behind it is to key on what the bass sees, right, and it being an easy smaller meal. But you can see the rattle, still little light rattle in there. These are a lot lighter. So you got to look at that in terms of casting distance a lot of times with these, as opposed to like a crankbait, right, that's 2.5 inches. This is probably one of my little favorite ones right here, is that different times of the year, especially wintertime with that dark black. Everything tends to be like more black in the wintertime. But then early spring, I'm going to take this one out with me this weekend, is because it's early spring, and a lot of times, they're going to be out keying, and they're going to want to key in on the red, okay, because they're out there trying to feed up again after the wintertime as they're moving away from those deeper holes to their like springtime areas. And so you play that, with your colorations based on their eyes, right? Like what they seeing through their eyes. They're seeing in shades of green and red. That's it. That's all. That's how they see things. Everything else is just gray. Okay, um, but you still, want to make sure that you're more focused on size. Okay, like for your forage, it amazes me sometimes that like if you have your forage dialed in, you're gonna know that to reach for like 2 inches, 2.5 inches, three, and as the season progresses, your forage get bigger and bigger, right? Um, and so then you can change along with the season to reflect what the forage actually look like in your fishery, right? It's just logic. Present to the fish what they're actually seeing in their fishery, right? And then go with like the exception of that, go with like natural colors, right? Natural golds, browns, creams, anything like that. It's going to entice those strikes. And you can go crazy. So this is one I had sent to me. It's a really neat little bait. It's kind of crazy, but I mean, they're just coming out with all kinds of stuff. I haven't fished this one yet, but it's just interesting. I kind of like the color though, but it's more like a sexy shad. If you look at it, blue up here, yellow down the middle, down the lateral line. It's more like a sexy shad kind of pattern taken from a crankbait. It's just pretty interesting to see that the detail that these guys, put in these, especially these ones that are like that. It's kind of crazy. But that's just like your small style finesse like presentation baits for hard bait. I consider them to be for me more twitchy. So if you're an angler who is really great at like twitching that jerk bait, it's an easy transition to finesse with these really small baits because I treat them all just like that same kind of jerk, and retrieve, change your cadence, change your speed of your cadence up, in that kind of regard, for these baits. But mainly you're twitching and twitching these baits just like you would a jerk bait. But the problem is, for a lot of people, is you have to take a little bit off of that. It's physics, right? You got to take a little bit off that torque because these are lighter than your 110, right? If I got a jerk bait thrown, here we go. This is a 110 Junior, okay? So that's relatively smaller than your standard jerkbait, right? And so compared to this, so when you twitch this, that energy from your line, from your rod tip into your jerkbait moves that jerkbait, right? You're transferring that energy, okay, when you're doing that twitch. When you twitch these smaller baits, the erratic movement is way more extreme. Okay, and you can try that if you're out on your boat. You can try to work it up within like maybe 10 yards of your boat. And once you get a couple of these, and you try to if it's new to you, and you can kind of work and see what's the distance in terms of the physics and the energy that I need to do to my rod tip. It's the same as like tube when you're fishing with a tube. Like, what amount of torque do I need to provide the twitch to get the action movement that you want, right? When that bait is a lot further away from you and you can't see it, right? And so that's what you're really looking for. Is once you can dial that in closer to your boat, or the bank or wherever you are on a rock line, and when you're watching, okay, that it's going to move that bait, make that bait a lot more erratic, and that erratic action during those bite windows is critical. It doesn't matter whether it's the 4-inch, 5-inch, jerk bait or something that's 2.25 inches. Okay, that vibration in the water column is being traversed, and the sound and on their lateral line, they're picking that up. Okay, and so the size really isn't critical as much as those. Obviously, the bigger jerk baits got that extra treble on them, right? So you got 3 hooks on there instead of you have 2 hooks, on the smaller ones. But it's still pretty vital to like really dial that in a little bit. Just go out there and cast and throw the smaller baits the same way that you would throw the larger size baits. Because I think it's critical that you kind of like understand that dynamic. Not only the weight transfer, how like a lot of jerk baits have that weight transfer system, right? As long as everything that's going on inside. You don't really have that transfer system in most of these smaller baits. So it's really going to be dependent upon your action and what you do with your twitch and your cadence of how you reel it in that's going to provide, the kind of action that you really, really want from these baits. You definitely have to play with them a bit as opposed to some of the more expensive $20-$25 jerk baits that have a weight transfer system that allow you to do a couple different things in the water column. Most of these tend to be more, you're going to find, are going to be more floating than sinking on the market. Okay? Doesn't mean that there's not the sinking ones don't exist. Probably Megabass probably has some, that fall into that category. But, in terms of the finesse baits, there's so many. I probably have 20 or 30 new finesse baits that, I'm looking forward to really getting out there this spring and giving them a go. Kind of like all different styles. This one's more, see the front on that? This one's more of that like popper kind of like style or like Sammy kind of deal. That's just a small kind of probably like knockoff, like whatever, kind of like, of something that has always worked for 30 years, right? And it's got that front on it, no bill, displace the water. See that right there? It's got the hole in there for that water, which obviously flows through that into that kind of like area, and it just creates that movement on the top. So that kind of like works out as opposed to these being a little bit different. You've got the front with the bill being completely different. So, and these are kind of available, like I said, in some pretty crazy colors. But the really cool thing about these baits is you can get them easily painted in the colors that you want that are going to mimic your shad, your shiners, your minnows, whatever that is. That are going to match your natural forage species. So they're pretty easy to paint up. And like a lot of these, there's like two colors, man. It's like, like two colors. It's really it. 3 colors on this, okay? Outside of the base color. So you're looking at like 4 max colors, of airbrush paint per bait max. And then you can make all kinds of different variations within that based on, repainting something or getting the blanks. I'm going to do a newsletter post. I'll put it in the description, our Smallmouth Substack newsletter. I'm going to do the blanks. So where you can, it's probably the number one question I get is where can I get the blanks? Because a lot of people want to get into like doing their own baits, and this is an easy one to do. It's just like it's really, really simple. And you don't really have much with $100. You don't really have that much into it. You can buy an airbrush. You can buy 3 or 4 colors. You now can get the airbrushes. You don't need to spend the $100 on an air compressor. You can get the self-contained airbrushes with the actual electric that you plug in that have the little compressor for the air. If you're not making that hundreds and thousands of baits, you can go that route. You don't need to go with the big air compressor that probably costs you about $150. For that PSI, you can go with the ones that'll just sit right on your table and plug them in, and you've got enough pressure, and you can just paint yourself up, a dozen or so. Like again, if you're not producing hundreds or thousands of those baits, you really don't need to go out and spend $100 on a big compressor. And you don't need to go out and spend a lot of money. I think the airbrush paints are about anywhere from $5 to $8 for 2 ounces. There's some that are more expensive, like the Wicked colors from Kayak that may be a little bit more expensive, but you can just get the Hobby Lobby, Michaels. If you got a hobby store, they're definitely gonna have airbrush paints for all kinds of crafts and all that kinds of stuff. And it just comes down to like doing really, really simple patterns, right? Doing simple patterns like a perch or a sunfish pattern, a minnow, shad pattern, right? Your shiner pattern, okay? 3 colors, okay? That's it. Black, gold, white, okay? And then same with this, okay? 4 colors, really, if you count the base color. Okay, and so you can get away with with, like I said, like $100, which includes blanks, which will run you can run you $1 depending on 50 cents to all the way up to like $5 or $6 if you get a swim bait or something like that. So you can figure it out. You can budget yourself up. I'm gonna put $100 to this. So I'm gonna buy an air gun, a small little air gun. I'm gonna buy 6 or 8 paints. I'm gonna buy a dozen blanks, different kinds of blanks, crankbaits, minnows, jerk baits, whatever. And you can start just like that. Look at pictures. I do a lot in my newsletter on forage and taking pictures of forage out in the water, matching them up. So you can match them up with what you're painting. Like I said in the video I did on the trout, I just looked at it like colors, right? What does a rainbow trout look like? Right? It looks like that. Okay? Rainbow trout looks like that. And then copy them. What's a perch look like? It looks like that. Okay? It's very simple, and you can do the stencils yourself. Like you can make your own stencils. Or you can buy stencils too. They're actually more expensive than probably anything else. They're more expensive than the actual paints, to be honest with you. Stencils could be like 16 to 18, 19 bucks sometimes. But they last forever though. More or less. But you can cut, you can do your own out of cardboard stock to create, like if you're doing a crawl pattern or if you're doing a perch pattern and you want to get these lines like that, you can do that. There are ways you can figure out. There's tons of videos on YouTube, guys. For lure making. It's fascinating to me. I can watch them all night long. Because it's just an art. It's an art form, and we got some really, really great custom bait makers here in our region as well, and we're gonna get to promoting them a lot more. There's a few that are going into the micro side, which is really, really cool because I think the market is moving in that direction. This last year, we saw really an increase in the poppers. Poppers kind of came back to life a little bit in the hard bait section after just the hard bait sales and inventories just getting crushed at Big Buck because people weren't buying hard baits last year, man. They were all buying all the forward-facing sonar stuff, soft plastics, minnows, jig heads, hover strolling, all that kind of stuff. And it's just the way the market kind of moves, But again, nobody knows your river system better than you, okay? In terms of what you see out there and what you catch fish on, and then you just leverage that. If you've got designs or ideas, like I said, if you got a great color crankbait, doesn't matter who the manufacturer is, and you like that pattern, you can easily transfer that pattern. Maybe not 100%, but pretty close for yourself in other formats, right? A smaller crankbait, or maybe into a jerkbait, or maybe into a popper, right? Or maybe into a whopper plopper, right? That's work. Some of the best whopper ploppers that I have are actually custom paint jobs all from crankbaits. I just took a picture of the crankbait, okay, that was getting a little bit older, but had been a fish catcher, and then, right, find someone or myself and try and mimic that kind of coloration pattern in a whopper plopper. And sure enough, it works. Okay? And so those are just some things you can do to kind of slowly tiptoe into the finesse. Obviously you can just buy them straight outright, or you can make them yourselves. Order, like I said, sort of like 6 or 8 of them, and paint them up yourself for less than $100. But you've always got the gun. You've got the paints last forever. It seems like. It really does. Like I said, unless you're painting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of custom baits, or you're as a side hustle, or you're a seller, paints are gonna last. Your stencil's gonna last. Baits will be around. So it's a pretty good investment if it's something that you really want to get into. And like I said, in smallmoutharmy.substack.com, I'm going to break down the finesse baits, going to break down where you can go and get your blanks, paints, pretty simple. You can order them online on Amazon. You can order them, you could probably get them on Temu and wherever, like anything else, Alibaba, anything else that's out there that's on your phone that'll deliver to your house, or just go on the Hobby Lobby website. They deliver home delivery. So does Michael's, and Joann's, I think, is another one. that's got stuff like that. I mean, they're around. You could find it out. You don't need to go to a specific bait making website that tend to be more expensive, to be honest, than if you just go up to a local store and try and find out that stuff and just get started. Again, man, just play around with it. That's what I've done. And I got some favorites, man, that I'll put up against any store brand. Period. You know, and nothing better than that. Nothing better than making your own bait, you know, or designing your own bait and having a custom bait maker make it for you, and then catch fish, right? Nothing better than that, in my opinion. It's just awesome. But that's it. Finesse baits. Again, I'll link everything in the description. Hope everybody has a great day. Appreciate it. Like and subscribe to the channel. If you have anything you want me to cover or anything specifically, I need to get back into the putting on the map here. The weather's clearing up now. It's getting a little bit nicer. Still a lot windy this week. It's kind of kept a lot of people off the water, but spring's pretty much coming, and we're going to get back on the water and do a lot of putting on the map series. I can't wait for we're probably 3 weeks away. Maybe depends on the weather for the shad run, so I'm going to be out there doing some videos during the shad run on the river. Try and get into that. It's kind of crazy. It's a lot of fun when the bass start chasing the shad during the shad run. So we're going to have a lot more stuff coming that's going to be like that, and we got some more events coming up too. So it's going to be really, really great here to finally get into spring and to get some of these baits out on the water this year that haven't been on the water yet and kind of see how they do. All right, guys.